Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Optimizing Human Performance podcast. I'm Martin Jones, and in this episode, seasoned strength and conditioning coach Chris Toombs gives us the lowdown on how to maximize training success.
In my 30 years experience, I would say the killer of progress is over-prescription and volume. I do higher quality work with less volume to get a similar or better outcome.
We discuss the common misconceptions around strength and conditioning.
I think the biggest constraint people have is their own heads when it comes to, I haven't got an hour to train, so I won't do anything. You can microdose really, really effectively if you've got a little bit of knowledge, you've got a little bit of education, and you're prepared to chip away and be consistent.
We explore the role of training in maintaining good physical health over time.
My advice to anyone would be don't ever stop. You can slow the aging process, you can slow the degradation of physical quality down.
And how the right training program can optimize both physical performance and longevity.
If you can develop good habits in your 20s so that you can train in your 30s and your 40s, you've then given someone the opportunity to not feel like a 70-year-old when they're 50.
Chris, welcome to the Optimizing Human Performance podcast. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. And appreciate the invite.
No worries, absolutely my pleasure. We've known each other pretty well for, just over a year, isn't it really, that we've kind of been working alongside each other in different bits and pieces. So I know all about you and what you're about, but can I lob it straight across to you to tell the listeners who you are, what do you do, and how long have you been doing what you've been doing?
Yeah, I'll give you the short version. I am a physical performance specialist with a coaching background, historically in professional sport. This is my 30th year coaching. I started coaching England women's rugby players, and then I graduated to Leicester Tigers whilst England were doing quite well, winning the Rugby World Cup in 2003, which was a fun start to my sort of professional sports journey. Bounced down into Cardiff, did 10 years there as senior strength and conditioning coach, working across the academy and the senior team. Developed some reasonably well-known players, dined out on that a few times in the past. You're just giggling along because you know who some of those are. So yeah, proud 10 years in Cardiff. During that spell, I was fortunate enough to meet and marry an American. So I ended up crossing the water and having two stints in semi-professional and professional rugby in North America. Came back to the UK, worked with SW7 Academy, which is Sam Warburton's online fitness platform, for a few years. And I'm now in a job that basically helps physically prepare soldiers for the work that they do. That's the whistle stop. But yeah, predominantly professional sport, mainly rugby union, a little bit of action sports, a bit of professional cricket, and now predominantly military sector.
So 30 odd years working in S&C and preparing elite performers for the rigors of whatever it is they're doing. What are the big changes that you've experienced or that you've seen over those 30 years?
Personally, there's an evolution as a coach, but I would think the biggest change in evolution across performance generally would be the integration of technology and monitoring and all of the things that you'd expect with the advancements of wearable technologies and the internet being much more established now than it was. I think that would be the biggest one. I guess on a coaching level and a personal level, the human side of it for me has always been the cornerstone of the success. So I think personal philosophy used to be around, if I build a better athlete, then it's someone else's problem to build a better player. And I think as I've evolved as a coach and a practitioner, I think my personal philosophy's evolved to the point where even as a physical performance specialist with a bias in that particular area, it was always about the person first, then it became the player second, then it became the athlete third. Whereas I suppose some of the biggest mistakes that I made as a young practitioner would be, well, he's fast and he's strong, so why isn't he any good at the sport? Whereas if you think about what we're here to do, it's to play sport at the highest possible level. So that was priority number one. But I took it a step back and actually said, well, no, the guy in front of me is priority number one. We don't have to like everyone we work with, but ultimately connecting on a human level will get the best possible outcomes and the best possible effort. So if I could connect on a human level, that's the start point. Then understand, obviously, the needs and the demands of the sport and the needs and the demands of that particular player, strengths, weaknesses, gap analysis, all that usual stuff. It might have been that actually physical performance wasn't their limiting factor. So take your ego out of this as a coach and as a player and actually go, well, from a performance standard standpoint, you're hitting gold standard across all of the metrics of fitness that we take in terms of our benchmarking and our profiling, but your specific role within the team is X. and you're not nailing that role. So why don't you spend less time in the gym and more time on your specific skills so that you become a better player? And I've had this conversation with many, many players, which they loved the S&C, they loved the gym, but they couldn't nail the fundamentals of their role and ended up not staying in environments as long as they should because they had the professional standards physically, but they didn't have the professional standards as a player. And I remember telling a hooker one day who couldn't hit a barn door with a bloody throw-in that, mate, spend double the amount of time on your throwing than you do in the gym and you'll end up being a world-class player. Unfortunately, that specific example didn't manifest itself into world-class player because he kept reverting back to his bias, which was physical capability. But the skills in his sports context let him down time and time again. And he didn't stay in professional sport long because ultimately he couldn't nail his fundamental role. So that's how I kind of ended up being a much more 360-degree holistic type coach. And that's where this whole kind of interdisciplinary teamwork and collaborative thinking comes about. What I would table the collective intelligence model, which I stole from a cricket performance coach named Paddy Upton, which would be all of the coactives of performance have to link up to optimize your performance. And it might be that actually your limiting factors not in my wheelhouse, so I'll push you into the wheelhouse that you need to get into to improve your performance. And that's where performance psychology, nutrition, performance analysis, maybe even the physios had better impact than I had. And obviously the tactical technical coaches had an enormous influence over players' development as well. So that's in a nutshell the sort of philosophy banged away. What's changed in performance sport over the last 30 years would absolutely be a deluge of data and insights and relative understanding. But I still think we've got to come back to the human side of performance to get the best out of people in a sustainable long-term way, I guess.
I don't think I've ever met an S&C coach who's told people to stop going to the gym. I think you're unique in that respect. If they need to get out of the gym and do the technical skills, it makes sense, but you're right, there's a lot of ego there. It's like some people just want to stick on what they know, get in the gym because I'm an S&C guy, come with me and I'll get you better, but it doesn't always work that way.
No, absolutely. And it goes back to the fundamental core philosophy, which is, are they a good human? Can you help nurture that part of their life? Are they good at the sport? You're a professional sports player. You must have some fundamental skills that have got you into the talent identification pool in the first place. But inevitably, as we both know, truly high performers, in order to stay there, have to continually work on their craft. And ultimately, there's other people chomping at their heels time and time again. And I'll give you some specific examples. Sam Warburton and I got on really, really well. But the reality was, in terms of ruthless ambition, he knew in 2006 he was going to the 2011 World Cup. And he knew that he was going to take the place of one of Wales's leading players at the time, Martin Williams. And he knew in order to get past Martin, he had to be just ruthless with his preparation and his performances. That's the sort of thing that you have to try and nurture. And yes, physical capability in Sam's case was a real strength. But also the reality was there was other parts of his game that needed improving, and he would be a student of the game, master his craft, understand the breakdown as he became famous for. He would do all the video analysis under the sun, all the mobility work under the sun, so he could get in the right positions at breakdowns to be as effective as possible. And so, yes, physical capability and diligence to training was an absolute breeze. You had other characters on the flip side of that who you either couldn't get in the gym because they were, smoking behind the bike sheds, or characters of interesting caliber who challenged you, and you had to drag them kicking and screaming to the gym, or you had to find creative ways to develop their strength and power qualities, particularly with things they wanted to do. Some of the lads hated the gym but would love sled towing. So guess what? Sled towing is their weapon of choice. You have to just think about who's in front of you and not try and fit the square peg in the round hole. Those are the challenges we all have in all domains of performance enhancement. There's going to be certain techniques that people gravitate towards, enjoy, like, but there's also some things that they need to do rather than they want to do. And I think that's the role of a coach, is try to build the relationship and trust with people so that, here, listen, Martin, 80% of what you're doing is brilliant, but that 20% that might make the difference. Why don't we just try and meet somewhere in the middle and just try some of things, try something different. Try and remove some bias that a player may or may not have for a specific exercise modality or framework of training that they've used in the past that's worked, but they now might have a couple of niggles and we've got to modify things. And those are the kind of challenging conversations that come back down to, can you get on with someone? Can you connect with them? Have you got a trusting relationship with them? Can you be honest and transparent? And can you basically collaboratively work together? That sometimes takes a shit ton of time. If you stick to your fundamental principles you'll get there in the end, but it's got to be a collaborative process. And I think mistakes made in my younger days, again, would be trying to fit everybody into my way of thinking, my map of the human performance world. And I think one of the things that changed immeasurably through some building of some good relationships was actually listening more than I talked. You might find that hard to believe given that we've worked together for a year, but the reality was the player in the arena understands what it takes to play at the highest level way, way more than I do, because I've never played elite level sport. I've worked at elite level sport, but never played at it. I started to listen a lot more. And when you listen a lot more, you can actually give the person what they want, but you also got to give the person what they need. And I think that was the balancing act. So yeah, when I was developing as a coach, you'd be like, no, my philosophy definitely better than yours. You take a few punches in the face metaphorically before you go, actually, I need to start listening to guys with 70 test caps, all blacks, 100 test cappers, guys who want to do things their way. And you just start to ask the right questions and start to feel your way into their perspective, their map of the performance world has worked for them over a given period of time, tons and tons of good years in some of the cases. I learned a lot off players in terms of how they prepared for competition. And then I could then hopefully take what's good about what they were doing and embed it into the process of providing service provision for others. So I stole some brilliant ideas from players and then integrated them as I evolved as a coach, which is the way it should be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Steal from other people and reuse it. That is the essence of good coaching. We had a conversation a while ago now. I remember I was having an issue with someone and I kind of was like banging my head against a brick wall. I don't know how to help this individual, didn't know how to coach them, to mentor them, whatever. And I remember you telling me something, it stuck out, and you said some people can't be coached. Some people just are very, very difficult. They're not receptive to being coached. I know you've had some experience of the difficult athlete. How do you navigate those tricky characters who just don't seem to listen or just don't seem to want to learn?
I've had some crackers here. I really have. But yeah, coachability is a really, really interesting thing. And I guess across sport, across the landscape I work in now, you've got the rule of thirds, right? You've got a third who are absolutely lapping up everything about human performance, everything about elite level preparation, elite level playing, elite level soldiering, whatever it might be. And then you've got the third who dip in and out and take it or leave it. I think the power of peer-to-peer is really, really an important concept, because I always knew that players would respect players because they're the men in the arena, which is brilliant. And I always knew that if a couple of really diligent lads pulled in a couple of lads who were maybe not so diligent when it comes to their prep and just pulled them along for the ride, they'd jump in and they'd give it their all and they'd show hard effort. And then you got a third who are really, really quite challenging and really, really quite difficult. I tended to, at the latter stages of my career in professional rugby, really enjoy the challenge of trying to get a level of influence in that particular group of people, because I felt like the diligent ones would look after themselves with whatever you provided for them from a programming perspective or service provision, whatever. I guess to answer the question, it goes back to the human side and the connection side. I guess an unconventional way of doing it would be, let's talk about your program, Martin, over a meal out or a beer. And that sounds like the performance coach is taking me for a beer. Unreal. This is awesome, and it could go in two very different directions. But I did that with professional cricket, Martin, to be honest. Quick story. I got to one of the professional cricket teams about 10 years ago now. And I, on my first or second day, was like, what have I done? I've transitioned from a sport like rugby, where physical prowess and power and strength and dominating someone in collision was really important, to a very high skill sport where lads loved going out drinking. They were very skillful, but physical preparation and S&C wasn't really a priority. I was like, what have I done here? I've got myself into a rabble. There's literally dysfunction here from a physical performance standpoint that is going to take every single ounce of skill that I've developed over the last 20 years to try and make something of this opportunity/challenge. And it did. It came down to basically building connections with people that are relatively sticky and the friction was high, to just get on a connection level with them, however that may be. Away trips on the bus would be playing cards with some of the lads. It might be, like I say, taking individuals out for food. You could actually start unpacking some of the friction and some of the challenges and actually get to know them and connect with them. But anyway, the long and the short, the uncoachable lad is a challenge, but inevitably it's about how can we connect on any level. Me trying to impose my program on you is not a good start point. Me listening to Martin Jones, Martin, how can I help you? How can my skill set make you better? How can I keep you in this system longer? We always want the best availability. We want career longevity. We want players in my sports world and the service personnel now to serve for a long time, to be elite at what they do, to challenge themselves, to believe in themselves as capable operators. We've got to just connect on a level whereby they feel like it's not about S&C or performance. It's about, actually, this guy cares about me and he wants me to do well in my domain, and I want to do well in my domain. And actually, the guy might be of use. And it might be one little snippet. It might be a full program. It might be anywhere in between. But the reality is the care, the human side, the relationship side still matters deeply for most people, especially when they are wanting to look to master their craft, whatever that craft may be. People who want that perfection or want to at least pursue mastery, they will gravitate towards someone who can help them. And there are people that I've come across, in rugby particularly, there was a couple of uncoachable lads who didn't really pay any attention to any service providers within their performance environments. They just got on with their own thing. But in a squad of about 50, plus your support staff and your coaches and all the other people that are part of the ecosystem, you might have 80 people. So if 2 people don't want to spend any time around you, focus on the other 78. Just service and provide the best possible care for those who actually care back. And those who don't, they'll either stick around because they've got something that is unique and extraordinary, or they'll be out the system. And I've seen players come and go who probably didn't do their careers justice, even if they were exceptional at some point in time, but didn't have the career longevity because they maybe did neglect some of the things that could have helped them. And I'm sure that's probably the same for every performance coach who's worked in elite sport particularly.
I'd agree with that. Let's just pivot away from that for a second and just track back to these players who've got the longevity that you talked about. In a game like rugby and rugby union, and I guess any collision sport, it takes a lot out of you physically to train at that level, to compete at that level. I remember talking to a physio who was saying that it's equivalent to a controlled car crash once a week, the kind of damage that's been done to the musculoskeletal and the head and the brains, as well as the muscles and the bones. But that's difficult for someone who's getting 100+ caps. To withstand that shock to the system is hard. So what are your thoughts? How do you, as a physical performance specialist, condition people to stay in the game for as long as they want to?
I mean, there's no N=1 answer here. There's a lot of typical S&C, it depends type offshoots of this. But I guess, first and foremost, look at the traits and behaviours of those who have longevity in the game, and you won't go far away from those who've got really good professional habits. And by that, I mean, they'll do their preparation, whether that's the recovery side, the nutrition side, the sleep side, the strength and conditioning side, of course, the video analysis side, the tactical, technical. They'll do all of the pillars of high performance with as much diligence as they can cope with when it comes to filling up the stress bucket week in, week out. But then also, I'm not naive enough to think that some of the most high profile and players who made the most impact on my career personally as well didn't mind 7 beers on a Tuesday night and get howling drunk on a Saturday night after a game either. So there's always the outlier who, despite living maybe what wouldn't be optimal lifestyle behaviours, still became a player with high levels of longevity in their career at an exceptionally high level. So it's a pretty complex one, but I think the traits and behaviours of the absolute best that I had the pleasure of working with was always about never ever cutting corners in their prep. And that was across all of those pillars that we've discussed. And I guess there is a level of luck as well, because again, not wanting to just harp on just one specific player. But Sam Warburton only played about 100 games for Cardiff and 70 odd for Wales, and spent a lot of time injured, not because he wasn't diligent enough to do the preparation, but because the position he played was pretty attritional. Lewis Moody at Leicester Tigers would have been the same. That guy put his body on the line for his teammates week in, week out. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a car crash every weekend, every week of the year. So you've got to be looking after your body. That's getting the tune-ups from the physio. That's having time on the massage bed. That's investing in your health, well-being, getting the right sleep, getting the right nutrition. When you get to a specific physical quality and your levels are hitting gold standard, the good thing about that is that maintaining those levels is much easier than developing them. Once someone can squat 200 kilos, the risk-reward ratio of squatting 210 was negligible. It goes back to the main overall philosophy that I have, which is 210 kilos squat going to improve the player? And if the answer is no, that's boxed off. That is not part of the training gap scenario. So think about other performance variables that are going to make the difference. And that's the thing that you've always got to think about, which is do less. You've got the amateur players now who, in my experience, would spend so much time banged up and fatigued by training because they trained with such excessive volume. Whereas because the evolution of sports science and integrated performance management came about through my career as a coach, load monitoring and all that stuff is obviously part and parcel of their planning and their preparation framework. So the reality is you didn't actually have to do that much training when you had those physical qualities, because a small minimum effective dose, for example, does the job. So why do any more than that? Focus on the other pillars: recovery, get an extra nap, get an extra hour on the physio bed, get an extra sports massage, whatever it might be. So actually it goes back to that performance philosophy, which is sometimes doing less is actually going to provide more benefit. And this leads nicely into lowering the orthopedic costs, by the way. And that's the confidence that you've got of understanding and interpreting objective data, with also that intuition that actually in a Heineken Cup, European Cup week, lads only need 2 30-minute weight sessions, more so to feel good about themselves as opposed to the actual physical stimulus that you're trying to drive. A strong lad on Tuesday is still going to be a strong lad on Saturday, but which day of the week's more important? It's Saturday. So it's just a feel-good Thursday weight sessions, integrate some velocity-based training, throw some moderately heavy weights around moderately quickly. Lad feels good. Lad shows up on Saturday feeling good. It's that kind of rinse and repeat, but there's a fair few complexities to get it to that level of simplicity, but you know what I mean.
Lowering the orthopedic costs. Now, you threw out that phrase. It's a phrase that I've come to love. We've talked about it more than once. What is it? Can you explain why you need to lower the orthopedic cost of training?
From my perspective, it's easy to say when you get to 50 that if you train like you're 50 when you're 30, you better train like you're 30 when you're 50, because I'm actually lived that experience. But to answer the question as succinctly as possible, especially in collision sport, and I've done some work in action sports as well, so this is very pertinent to both of those things. Lowering the orthopedic cost of training is to train hard, but to train with longevity and sustainability in mind. So what that basically means is, going back to the 200 squat analogy, once a player's got a lower body leg strength capability that's at elite level, pushing them further and further and further is going to cost them. And it's going to cost them with neuromuscular or structural damage, back pain, knees are hurting, whatever it might be. So I guess as my philosophy as a coach has evolved, I've tried to advocate for obviously developing high levels of physical prowess. Of course I have, but at minimal cost. And that seems really, really difficult in people's minds to process, because I look at it as a very long-term project as opposed to instant gratification. What do you mean I'm not going to be an absolute strength freak in 6 weeks' time? No, I want to build physical capacity over years and years and years. And if you've got long-term thinking, you can do that by basically lowering the orthopedic cost of training. Replace heavy squats and conventional deadlifts with single leg variations. Use the sled, use the high handle trap bar, use the machine bench press rather than the conventional methodology, because what I want to do is lower the cost of training, but I still want to keep the cost of training hard as part of the programming. So I'm a massive advocate for training hard, recover hard. And so lowering the orthopedic cost is essentially stripping out the excessive volume. It's junk mileage. It's just junk mileage that we want to try and be as dialed in as possible. Minimum effective dose is something that's really important for me, especially if you've got high levels of physical capacity. You've also then, alongside the physical piece, is take into consideration the demands of the sport or the demands of the work that's being done in the case of the military, and marry the two things up. So if you're in arduous military training conditions, training has to be adapted accordingly, because you can't just keep layering high levels of stress upon high levels of stress and expect someone not to break. It's exactly the same philosophy in sport. The minimum effective dose and doing as little as possible to maintain elite levels of physical quality requires you to do less. And by doing less, you lower the orthopedic cost of training. You're still not saying do nothing or take your foot off the gas. Low volume, high intensity work is still required. But the reality is, instead of doing 3 or 4 sets, you do 2 sets. And instead of doing a back squat when your back's feeling a bit niggled, you do a high-handled hack bar. You just modify what you've got in front of you and have a framework where you actually think, A 25-year-old doesn't really give much attention to mobility. But when they're 40, mobility is the cornerstone of their program. So if you can develop good habits in your 20s so that you can train in your 30s and your 40s, you've then given someone the opportunity to not feel like a 70-year-old when they're 50, because you've actually given them really good quality training and a structured framework, but it hasn't cost their body as much as they think it would. Rugby is tough enough as it is. So why push boundaries in your gym that cause injury when the sport's dangerous enough as it is? There's enough challenges in collision sport without you thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to tear a pec because I really care whether my bench press is 140 or 145. It's irrelevant. It's about keeping your body in one piece so you're actually functionally able to perform your sport at the highest possible level. And so that's where the sort of lowering the orthopaedic costs came out, which is actually, what can I take out of a program that's more ego-led than it is performance-driven? The difference between doing a chest press and a bench press is negligible in the grand scheme of performance outcomes. It's just your ego. I don't care if anyone benches 150, 160, 170. I genuinely don't care. I care whether they're functionally able to perform at the highest level on the field on Saturday, but also, more importantly, going back to people, player and athlete in that order, I do give a shit whether at 40 they can still train because they're functionally able to do so. I mean, I've got players who've come into the end of their career and have retired and what have you. I have text messages still. Two things generally are, thanks, I still do the mobility circuits that you put together for us and my body feels fine. And I've had, I wish I'd listened to you about mobility because now it's the cornerstone of my programming and I now do mobility as a really important part of my weekly regime, which I kind of smile about and go, yeah, actually, they did listen. It took 20 years, but they did listen in the end. But you can only live that when you are a slightly older person within the realms of performance. And it's like telling a 20-year-old mobility is really important. They're like, yeah, whatever. Telling a 40-year-old, they go, yeah, I get it.
It's so true. I think we work with people who are relatively young. And it's always interesting to me that you take a 26-year-old and actually they're quite robust to like a bad diet, for example. But that same man when he's 45 will not be so robust to a bad diet. I definitely see it in physical training. I used to train with a good friend of mine, same sort of age, early 40s. And he was constantly injured. He had forearm injuries all the time. And I always used to say to him, just take the weights down. You don't need to lift in the way that you're lifting. And he was always like, well, I used to do this when I was 21 and I never used to get injured. And I'd always say, but you're not 21. You're in your 40s now. It's cost you. That sort of training has cost you. And you are not robust to that stress anymore on your system.
I think that's one of the hardest things to manage as you age and be self-aware enough to realize that your 25-year-old self is definitely different from your 50-year-old self. The other reality of that, from my perspective, would be if you live a kind of high-performing habits type lifestyle in whatever field that you're in, you can slow the aging process, you can slow the degradation of physical quality down. Don't get me wrong, you're not reversing the aging process. The reality is you're going to lose muscle mass, you're going to get a little bit fatter, but my advice to anyone would be don't ever stop. Yes, there might be some restrictions that you've got in your everyday life, given that you've been in a collision sport, knee injuries, soreness, whatever it might be. But I would certainly encourage everyone who's played sport at high level and everyone who trains, never stop, because that is the fastest way to change that metabolic profile and to age that little bit quicker. It's easy for me to say, one, I'm a physical performance coach, but two, I've got a 37-year training age. I never want to stop. I always want to be functionally capable. I want to be that 80-year-old in the gym doing like at least minimum body weight pull-ups and probably body weight plus on the hex bar deadlift and push that heavy sled and all that usual stuff that I'm doing at the moment. I want to push functional capability for as long as possible. I know there's going to be a level of degradation, but I also know that with a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of consistency, I'll hopefully be able to go to the gym on my terms as opposed to disappear into the wilderness.
We've been in the gym together a couple of times. I know you've observed some people, they'll go in, they'll put 120 kilograms on a bench press and just bang out sets and reps. You said to me, it's almost like your worst nightmare, no warm up. They just get straight into it. So just talk us through a second. Obviously warm-ups are important, but if you're short on time, what should we be doing? If someone's only got 20 minutes and when they were training hard, they would be knocking out big back squats, big compound lifts. If you've only got 20 minutes, what's your advice?
Well, for me personally, I never skip the warm-up. Even if that warm-up is 3 to 5 minutes, that 3 to 5 minutes is going to save you time in the physio room in any walk of life. So working on areas of restriction and typical tightness, ankle mobility, hip mobility, move the thoracic spine, open up the shoulder, because the reality is the movement prep piece at the front end sets the tone for the rest of the session. So whether your session's 20 minutes long, 40 minutes long, an hour long, movement prep and unlocking those areas of tightness sets the tone for the rest of the session. It's a bit like the tree analogy, isn't it? About if I've got 5 hours to cut down the tree, I'll spend the first 4.5 hours sharpening the axe. If you sharpen the axe, i.e. get yourself ready for training, even 5 minutes of that 20 minutes is time well spent, because the next 15 minutes will actually be more effective and more efficient because your body is in a better position to actually do some good quality work. Again, it goes back to the typical S&C answer to this, Martin. It depends. If you've got 20 minutes and you want to develop a level of strength or keep muscle mass, a big giant set of push, pull, lower body, like 3 main exercises in rotation, 5-minute warm up, 5 sets of 3 to 8, depending on what you want to do. You can do something in 20 minutes. If you've only got 15 minutes and you want to do some cardiovascular work, 5-minute warm up, 7-minute warm up, 1 minute on, 1 minute off for 12 minutes, you can get some work done. I think the biggest constraint people have is their own heads when it comes to, I haven't got an hour to train, so I won't do anything. You can microdose really, really effectively if you've got a little bit of knowledge, you've got a little bit of education, and you're prepared to chip away and be consistent. It goes back to that consistency piece. So I've got 20 minutes today and I've got 20 minutes tomorrow. Okay, so today I'll do my strength-based work with my warm-up, and tomorrow I'll do my aerobic-based work or my energy system development work with my 5-minute warm-up. Those 20-minute little exposures will keep you progressing, or at least they'll keep you from regressing. So the reality is you don't need an hour, but what you've got to do is you've got to chip away. You've got to be consistent. You won't go backwards with 20 minutes worth of strength training a day or 20 minutes of aerobic conditioning a day. You will go backwards if you stop doing anything because you think, oh, I haven't got time. But the one thing that I think is a real problem for a lot of people as well, going back to your 21-year-old mates analogy, 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds or even 30-somethings thinking that they can still physically be as capable as when they were training consistently and when they were 21. Unfortunately, you've got to think about this as that long-term process. And if you do play the long game, then the lowering the orthopedic cost and training like you're 50 when you're 30 so that you can train like you're 30 when you're 50, those analogies only present themselves if you take a long-term view on your health, well-being and performance. And that's the hardest thing for a 20-something-year-old to process. He or she doesn't give a shit about what they feel like at 50. But if they did, they'd probably be a high-performing human at 50 and not just 25. But you try telling that to a 25-year-old.
It's almost like you need to work alongside some kind of sports psychologist who could help you with the mindset side of things as well.
That's exactly right. That's why interdisciplinary performance services are absolutely essential. Nutrition, psychology, S&C, probably in that order.
You're lucky as well from a client point of view in that people like to look good, whereas you can't see the brain develop. You know, if you work on the psychology, there's very little outwardly facing changes in terms of appearance.
Yeah.
People want to go to the gym because they think it's going to make them look better. And, you know, it does. Of course it does. It's interdisciplinary, 100%. I absolutely agree with you.
You're right, though. The vanity side of physical performance is absolutely a driver. I've had numerous conversations, it would be in the thousands, with people who want to look better with their shirts off on the beach. And the offshoot of that will be they'll be better at sport because they're leaner as a consequence. They want the beach body for the off season as opposed to they want the beach body for their performances on the weekends. Vanity was a driver in a lot of players if they were honest with themselves.
Yeah, I believe it. I'll steal a phrase from Gaz Bamford and G Wood that a lot of people want to look like a Ferrari, but a lot of the time people need tractors.
Yeah.
You don't have to always look good to perform well.
No, absolutely. That's the other thing that keeps me awake and alive at night at the moment. Building Land Rovers and not Lamborghinis. The things that fascinate me and the things that I'm really gravitating towards as a professional is those high-performing humans. Are they structurally robust? Are they physically capable? Are they mentally resilient? The Land Rover analogy is all about, it's not going to set the world on fire, whether it's aerobically or from a strength qualities perspective, but it's super dependable.
You've clearly never owned a Land Rover, have you?
Mate, I actually, well, funnily enough, my dad owned a Mark I Land Rover Defender, but that was dependable. I know things have changed somewhat, but the analogy stands that a Lamborghini's got more things that can go wrong. And you want something that's super robust, super dependable, goes and goes and goes, got multifunctionality, etc. Whereas if I don't put the fancy fuel in the Lamborghini, it's going to break down. Well, life's not that simple in certain circumstances. So that's the kind of challenge that I try and solve at the moment, which is build the most physically robust human possible so that they can withstand the demands of their work, which is a cool kind of project to be getting on with.
I think that's got the potential to help a lot of people. If people listening just recognize that longevity means you have to do things slightly differently. You have to change your mindset, the way that you think about your training. I think that's potentially quite powerful. On that, how to train differently. You mentioned throwing weights around at certain velocities, and you talked to me about velocity-based training. I know you're a big fan and big proponent. What is this thing? You mentioned the technology's changed in we can now do this type of training, but what is it and what's the benefits?
Well, velocity-based training is a tool. It's a tool now that's evolved through linear position transducers, which used to be basically a machine that tethered to the bar and measured bar velocity. And ultimately, it's evolved now to Bluetooth-enabled wireless capability type tools that still measure the same thing, but do it in a slightly more sexy app-based way. It's got the capability to basically measure your strength levels today. And why that's important is because day-to-day fluctuations in human physiology can be very, very undulating. There's days when you feel absolutely dreadful and lifting 70% at 1 rep max feels like lifting 90%. And there's days when you want to lift at 90% at 1 rep max and it feels like 70% at 1 rep max. They're the good days. That's when your body is fully juiced up and ready to go. Velocity-based training allows us to objectively benchmark how ready you are to train today. And there's a lot of good reasons why. I guess there's an underlying kind of fatigue management piece. There's a athlete and player and operator engagement type piece where people will love chasing objective data. They'll love the engagement, the gamification of training. And also, I guess, from my point of view, load management and understanding fatigue will be another really, really important part of understanding that stress yesterday has an implication and a cost today. Stress today costs you tomorrow. You can basically, with a little bit of intuition and some coaching and objective intervention, understand that what you do today is going to cost you tomorrow. So if you have had a long work day and a stressful work day, that's going to have implications on your training and how you get your strength levels or your adaptation driven through exposure to load. I got into it very, very early by luck rather than by design. Leicester Tigers had a load of England players. They had some tethered units. We started messing around with velocity-based training early 2000s. I've since evolved my programming to just take the best bits of it and just do a little snippet at a time, not overload athletes and players with the technology. Measuring your strength levels today, getting you in the sweet spot so you do just enough and not anymore. So the cost of training is absolutely ideal as opposed to overcooking or undercooking. And then it's the gamification where the athlete just engages that bit more in their training space, because guess what? I can help you do less training, get better outcomes, and you don't have to spend hours and hours here. There's 3 wins right there. They do less with higher quality. They give themselves more opportunity to recover. They come back tomorrow feeling fresher and ready to do the next thing they've got to do. So that's what kind of captured my attention with velocity-based training. And there's tons of applications, but so many people make the biggest mistake of overcooking volume. This is a natural handbrake. Through understanding some of that data and some of those numbers, you're actually making sure that people hit the sweet spot. One of the best things about velocity-based training would be repetition max and percentage of repetition max aligns with the velocity. So the best way to describe this would be you historically lift 100 kilos at 0.5 meters per second for your back squats, and that equates to about 83 to 85% of 1 rep max. You're not feeling too well today and you lift 80 kilos at 0.5 meters per second. Your body is still getting the same stimulus, even though you're lifting 20 kilos less. This is what players and athletes really struggle to get their heads around. Even though you've lifted 20 kilos less within the session, because you've lifted it at 0.5 meters per second, showing maximum intent to move that weight as fast as you can, the cost and the physiological driver for adaptation is the same, because 0.5 meters per second aligns with 83 to 85% of 1 rep max. So you know you've given yourself the right dose for the response that you're looking for, but the load is different. The load is not necessarily relevant in this particular case because velocity aligns with relative intensity. Rugby players really struggle with this. A good example would be you play on Saturday and your first weight session of the week is on Tuesday. And because you've played the full 80 minutes, you're still in a fatigued state. You still haven't recovered from the experiences that you've had on that weekend. So your normal, say, 160 for 5 might be 140 on a Monday or Tuesday. The week after, they might play off the bench and they might only play 20 minutes, so they're less fatigued. So then they come into the gym on the Tuesday, less fatigued, more recovered, and that 160 feels really, really good. And they're moving that at 0.6 meters per second, not 0.5 meters per second. So they're stronger that day. So those are the sort of days where we go, right, let's chase some numbers. Let's chase some adaptation in a slightly more aggressive manner. And so undulating throughout the year based on the levels of fatigue that you may be fighting against when it comes to life stress, work stress, performance stress, whatever the stress may be, that has implications on your physiology and that moves day to day. So VBT just gives me the capacity to measure your strength level today. And that means I can give you the best possible dose response today. And it's not taken into consideration tomorrow or the next day. But what it will do, if you get the sweet spot right, it means you will be more recovered for tomorrow's activities, but you'll still get the intention to drive that adaptation through the stimulus that you've provided. And that's where I'm still fascinated by getting more and more people integrating that technology, because it's low burden. The app that I use particularly is very, very intuitive to people. It takes less than a minute to get going. So time poor is not an excuse. It's easily integrated into your everyday workflow. So that way you're just getting the best out of every training session, and that aligns totally with my lower the orthopedic cost, because now less is more. I do higher quality work with less volume to get a similar or better outcome when it comes to driving performance outcomes. So I've lessened the cost of training and I've enhanced my physical development. So it's a win-win for me. It's just about being more precise, I guess.
Makes sense. Sounds way more efficient. I remember reading about something called German volume training, GVT, and I heard somebody talking about it about 2 weeks ago, saying they were doing this program of these, what is it? It's like 10 reps by 10 sets. This guy works in a high stress profession, physically demanding, and he was saying he was absolutely creamed by it. He was knackered. Like he said, he had DOMs for weeks and just felt fatigued. But it sounds like, coming back to the things you've talked about, that's just way too much volume.
In my 30 years experience, I would say the killer of progress is overprescription and volume. Volume kills progress. I will die on that hill, Martin. That is the biggest challenge we've got with the population generally, and anyone who's read within the sort of community. GVT, German volume training. If you've tried it, and I've tried most of the methodologies that I've explored over my career, that would be one of the most horrendous training methodologies for sustainable long-term progress. That is the polar opposite of lowering the orthopedic cost of training. That for me would be one of the worst prescriptions of strength training / hypertrophy training that has ever been invented.
My personal experience of that sort of training is it lasted like one session. I remember just thinking, I'm not doing this again.
No, miserable experience. You talk about trying to get people on a 20, 30, 40-year journey into their physical performance and looking after their bodies. Expose someone to German volume training is one of the fastest ways to put people off. You do it once and never again. I would never, ever prescribe German volume training to anyone in the future of my prescription, ever. Anyway, we seem like we're ranting on now, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, some kind of anti-German rhetoric. It's the methodology that we don't agree with.
No.
So on that topic, you've mentored a lot of young S&C coaches who've gone on to do some awesome things, and I know that you're very, very well respected as a mentor in strength and conditioning. What are the things that you wish that all young S&C practitioners would know? If you could sort of reach out and help a load of young people who are trying to get into this profession, what are your words of wisdom? If you could boil it down into a couple of minutes, obviously this could be a whole different episode, but what are your words of wisdom for young practitioners?
Jeepers, mate. I mean, the Kruger-Dunning curve springs to mind straight away. One of the most powerful things I ever did, and I did it slightly later in my career, I did loads of these sort of personality assessments. I guess what I'm trying to suggest is self-awareness is a big thing. And I wish coaches would understand themselves along their pathway. And I know learning is about making mistakes and learning along the way through trial and error. But self-awareness is huge. And I think the more coaches who could be more self-aware from a younger age would probably fit into systems that require high levels of EQ, high levels of relationship building, high levels of trust and communication versus the sort of knowledge that they've got in a book sense. I think one of the biggest challenges the industry from a physical performance standpoint has at the moment would be tons and tons of people are very, very academically qualified, but don't necessarily have the practical application of that knowledge. And that's because a lot of people shy away, believe it or not, from coaching at the detriment of their craft because they've got an MSc, they've got a BSc, they've got a PhD, all of which I do think are obviously valuable. But I think in coaching particularly, the human side of it is massive, and understanding yourself so that you can then translate what you know and support your system is the biggest challenge that we have. I genuinely think that loads and loads of people would have fallen into the trap that I did, which is my programming at 25 is bulletproof and it's phenomenal. But as a good friend of mine used to say, the best program is shit if nobody turns up. And he's absolutely right. So I guess it's about adaptability, it's about evolution, it's about continually thinking about performance from not only your perspective, but from the people you serve's perspective. And that does start with understanding yourself and your self-awareness, but your emotional intelligence as well. I know this sounds kind of wishy-washy, but the sort of soft skills is always talked about as being really, really important, but nobody really focuses on them. Like I say, my programming could be phenomenal, the best program ever. But if nobody's going to be compliant enough to follow it because they don't trust the person, they haven't got the relationship with the person to actually buy into that system, then we're never going to know whether that's the best programming or not. It is the blend of the art and science. And I think, yes, there's academic rigor. Yes, there's scientific validity behind your thinking and your decision making. But there's also the human side of that. The art and the science of coaching is still something that's really, really valuable. I think understanding that from a young age, you're onto a win. And there's some brilliant people out there who do that exceptionally well. But I think those are the coaches who are in their early mid-20s who are going to accelerate and be the future performance directors. And I guess the other one is there's no such thing as an overnight success. If you think in your mid-20s that you're going to be a performance director at 30, you're living in a fantasy land because you've got to do the time in the seat. And ultimately, the understanding of that is going to take years and years to develop. There's a reason why there's no 30-year-old performance directors. The skill set is pretty complex, and you've got to understand a lot of different areas of focus before you could actually think about processing all that and putting it all together. So I think that's the challenge that you've got. I was there, mate. At Leicester Tigers, I thought my programming was the best of all time. It's evolved immeasurably in 25 years. And I would have been an absolute fool if it hadn't.
I see it with you. I see the relationship building. I think that is definitely a huge strength that you have. And I think one of the early questions is like, how has the field changed? And I think one of the big things now is I can go onto ChatGPT and get a program. If you engineer the prompt properly, you could probably get a very, very good program from an AI large language model. But like you said, it's not about that. It's about the relationship that you have with somebody who makes you want to then come to the gym and spend time with them and have that interpersonal connection with somebody who is there for you and cares about you and wants you to improve. It is the relationship fundamentally.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the sort of ChatGPT/AI type stuff. You're absolutely right, I'm sure. And I might, out of pure curiosity, jump on it straight after this podcast and just see what they can produce. But the reality for us is the human in human performance is really, really important. And that community, that connection, that is actually going to get the best out of that person in the long term, having that connection and not necessarily just downloading something off the internet and following it. Because I do think the human thrives in a community-based environment. And that's why some of these other offshoots, CrossFit, High Rocks, all that type of stuff has a level of following because there's a level of commonality and there's a level of community. But the reality of training alone for a long period of time, it's isolated, it's lonely. Some people might love that. Some people will seek out that human side. But I genuinely feel like coaching-wise, in order to thrive in life, everyone should have a coach. I'm going to say that. It doesn't have to be a physical performance coach, just a coach, whatever that might look like to you. But it's fascinating how it's going to evolve. But yeah, the internet is a curse and a blessing, as we both know, because influencers will influence. But long term, not many influencers are thinking about their customers in 20 years' time. The model that I'm hoping to try and translate to athletes is don't think about today, but think about now, the future and the long-term future.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Makes a lot of sense. Timothy, this has been an awesome conversation. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you're a busy man. You've listened to a few episodes of this podcast, so you know what's coming. We wrap up the episode by handing it back over to you for the final words, things you want to reiterate, maybe something you've not had a chance to talk about yet, or any other musings that you have on your life or S&C. So thanks again. Top episode. Really enjoyed it. Over to you. How do you want to wrap up?
No, thanks for having me, Martin. It's been a pleasure to chew the fat with you. If there's one message that I'd love to just share and to reinforce, it would certainly be think long term, be consistent. What you actually do week to week is important, but just stack the bricks. And I think if you train, never stop. And if you're thinking about training, just get started. And yeah, consistency in performance is about just stacking the bricks, and it's no easy fix. There's no hacks. Keep it simple, stupid. It's the fundamentals that win the day time and time again.
That's good. That's good. And if anybody wants to reach out to you or follow you or see what you're up to, what's the best way of people doing that?
Won't lie to you, I'm not the world's best on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, I post the odd bit, I repost people's stuff that I really enjoy. I do my best when people do reach out to me to sort of answer questions if I get them and get back to people. But Instagram and LinkedIn, I'm accessible.
Awesome. We'll have those in the show notes for you. Thanks again. Fantastic episode. I'm sure that's going to help a lot of people. So Toomsy, thank you.
Cheers, Martin.
That's it for this week's episode of the Optimizing Human Performance podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and if you found this valuable, take a moment to rate and review the podcast. If you know someone who'd benefit from today's conversation, then please share this with them. We're always keen to hear your thoughts. If you have feedback, guest suggestions, or topics that you'd love us to cover, then email us at info@ophp.co.uk or connect with us on LinkedIn. Until next time, keep striving, keep improving, and keep optimizing your performance.